I'm really glad you're here today. Imagine we're sitting together for a quiet moment, maybe with a warm cup of coffee or tea, just talking about life and the surprising paths people take to reach their dreams. Stories like this remind us that success doesn't come from one lucky moment. It grows slowly through courage, curiosity, and many small choices along the way. If you enjoy conversations like this, subscribing to English to Inspire helps more people discover these stories and practice English together. Today, I want to tell you the story of someone who started as a curious girl in India and eventually became one of the most powerful business leaders in the world. Her name is Indra Nooyi. She would one day lead the global company PepsiCo, guiding decisions that affected millions of people and billions of dollars. But that future was impossible to imagine when she was a young girl growing up in a modest home in the city of Chennai. Picture a warm evening in southern India in the 1960s. The air is heavy with the smell of spices from the kitchen. Ceiling fans turn slowly above the dinner table. A family gathers together after a long day. It is a simple home full of conversation, laughter, and sometimes serious debates about life and the world. This is where young Indra begins to learn something very important, not from textbooks, not from teachers, but from her mother. Her mother had a small habit that would quietly shape Indra's future. After dinner, she would ask her daughters a surprising question. She would say something like, "Imagine you are the president of the country. What would you do to improve people's lives?" Now imagine being a young girl and hearing that question. You might laugh. You might feel shy. But her mother expected a real answer. Each daughter had to stand up and speak. They would pretend to be leaders. They would explain their ideas. Sometimes they argued about solutions. Sometimes they spoke about helping poor families or improving education. It was a simple game, but think about what it was teaching them. Confidence, imagination, responsibility. Young Indra didn't realize it at the time, but she was practicing leadership every night at the dinner table. Have you ever had someone in your life who believed in you before you believed in yourself? Maybe a teacher, a parent, or even a friend who pushed you to think bigger than you normally would. Those moments matter more than we realize. In many ways, Indra's childhood looked very traditional. Her family valued education deeply. Good grades were expected. Discipline was normal. The idea was simple. If you worked hard in school, you could build a better life. But Indra also had something a little different. She had curiosity that refused to stay quiet. She loved learning, especially science. Numbers made sense to her. Systems made sense. When she studied physics, chemistry, and mathematics later in school, she didn't see them as boring subjects. She saw puzzles waiting to be solved. At the same time, she wasn't only focused on books. She played cricket with her friends, sometimes in dusty streets under the bright Indian sun. She also played guitar and even performed in an all-girls rock band at school. Now pause for a moment and imagine that scene. A young girl in India in the 1970s holding a guitar, playing music with confidence. At that time, many people believed girls should behave quietly and follow a very traditional path. But Indra was beginning to show a different kind of energy, not rebellious in an angry way, just curious, bold, and willing to try things. Sometimes success starts like that, not with a huge dream, but with a small decision to explore what interests you. Maybe you've felt that kind of curiosity too. Perhaps there's something you enjoy learning about, a skill you want to improve, a question that keeps returning to your mind. Those small interests can quietly guide your future. As Indra grew older, the expectations around her became stronger. Society often told young women what they should and shouldn't do. Many people believed the safest path was to follow tradition, choose predictable careers, and avoid big risks. But the world was changing, slowly but surely. And inside Indra, there was a growing feeling that her life might reach far beyond the streets of Chennai. At that moment, she didn't know how far her journey would go. She didn't know she would one day walk into boardrooms where billion-dollar decisions were made. She didn't know she would lead thousands of employees around the world. All she knew was that learning excited her, challenges energized her, and somewhere deep inside, she felt ready to see more of the world. And that quiet curiosity would soon push her toward choices that many people around her had never imagined. As Indra continued growing up in Chennai, those small dinner conversations at home slowly started shaping the way she saw the world. At first, they felt like a game, but over time something interesting happened. Speaking in front of her family no longer felt strange. Explaining ideas started to feel natural. Little by little, she was learning how to think like someone responsible for big decisions. Imagine a young teenager standing in a small living room, trying to explain how she would improve education or help poor communities. Her sisters might challenge her ideas. Her mother might ask questions. Sometimes they laughed, but sometimes the discussion became serious. In those moments, Indra was practicing something that many people only learn much later in life: how to think clearly under pressure. Think about this for a moment. Many people are afraid to speak in front of others. Maybe you felt that too. Your heart beats faster, your voice feels shaky, and suddenly every word becomes difficult. But Indra was slowly building that confidence in the safest place possible, her own home. Confidence often grows like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes. At school, Indra's curiosity became even more visible. She loved subjects that required logic and careful thinking. Mathematics and science were not just classes she had to pass. They were challenges she enjoyed solving. When teachers explained a new concept, she wanted to understand how it worked, why it worked, and what problems it could solve. She eventually studied physics, chemistry, and mathematics at college. For many students, these subjects feel heavy or difficult, but for Indra, they felt exciting. Each equation was like a puzzle. Each experiment was like a small discovery. But her life was not only about academics. Outside the classroom, she continued exploring different sides of herself. She played cricket with friends, sometimes competing fiercely, even though sports were often seen as more appropriate for boys at that time. She also continued playing music and performing with her band. Now imagine that scene again. A group of young women playing rock music in the 1970s in India. It was unusual. Some people might even have criticized them. But Indra seemed comfortable doing things that didn't perfectly fit the expectations around her. And this brings up an interesting question. Have you ever done something that others thought was unusual for you? Maybe you chose a career path that people didn't expect. Maybe you learned a skill that others thought was too difficult. Sometimes those choices can feel uncomfortable in the moment, but they often shape the strongest parts of our character. During this time, India itself was going through many changes. The country was growing, industries were developing, and more young people were beginning to think about global opportunities. Still, for many families, the idea of a daughter building an international career was not common. Yet Indra's ambition kept growing quietly. One story from her early years shows this determination very clearly. When she wanted to attend a good business school in India, she prepared intensely. Admission was competitive. Only a small number of students were accepted. She studied long hours, reviewed material carefully, and pushed herself to do better each day. And she succeeded. She was admitted to the respected Indian Institute of Management, Calcutta. Imagine arriving there as a young student, surrounded by brilliant classmates from across the country. The discussions were intense. The expectations were high. Professors challenged students to think strategically about businesses, markets, and leadership. For Indra, this environment felt like opening a new door. Suddenly, she was not only studying science, she was learning how companies operate, how leaders make decisions, and how strategies can change entire industries. She began seeing the world of business as a giant puzzle, full of moving pieces. And she loved it. But life rarely moves in a straight line. Even when you feel excited about a new path, challenges often appear. Indra soon realized that if she wanted to explore the biggest opportunities in business, she might need to go beyond India. She began thinking about studying abroad, possibly in the United States. Now pause and imagine that moment. Leaving your home country, leaving family, culture, familiar food, familiar language, traveling thousands of kilometers to a place that feels completely different. For many people, that idea would feel frightening. And honestly, it frightened Indra too. But sometimes growth begins exactly where comfort ends. And the thought of seeing a bigger world was becoming impossible for her to ignore. The idea of leaving India was both exciting and frightening for Indra Nooyi. Until that point, most of her life had been centered around family, school, and the familiar rhythms of Chennai. The sounds, the language, the food, the traditions, everything felt known and safe. But somewhere inside her, there was a growing feeling that if she wanted to learn more about the world of business, she needed to step into a much larger arena. One evening, she sat with her family discussing the possibility of studying in the United States. It wasn't a small decision. Traveling abroad in the late 1970s was far less common than it is today, especially for a young woman from a traditional Indian family. There were questions about safety, about money, about what life would look like so far away from home. Her family listened carefully. They knew Indra was ambitious. They had seen her determination since childhood. After many conversations, they supported her decision. And so she prepared for one of the biggest changes of her life, moving to study at Yale School of Management. Imagine arriving in the United States for the first time. The buildings look different. The streets feel wider. The conversations around you move quickly in an accent that takes time to understand. Even simple things like ordering food or asking for directions can suddenly feel complicated. That was the reality Indra faced. She later shared a story about one of her early experiences at Yale. She was preparing for an important job interview and wanted to dress professionally. But she didn't have much money, so she bought a simple suit at a discount store and prepared carefully for the meeting. When the interview happened, something unexpected occurred. Her appearance didn't match the typical image many American recruiters expected at that time. She felt uncomfortable and unsure. The interview did not go well. Now think about how discouraging that moment must have been. You travel across the world to pursue opportunity, and suddenly you feel like you don't fit in. Have you ever experienced something similar? Maybe starting a new job, entering a new school, or moving to a new city where everything feels unfamiliar. In those moments, many people start doubting themselves. They begin to wonder if they made the wrong choice. Indra had that feeling too. But something important happened after that difficult interview. One of her professors gave her advice that stayed with her for the rest of her life. The professor said something very simple. Don't try to become someone else. Be yourself. It sounds obvious, doesn't it? But when we feel pressure to fit into a new environment, we often forget this idea. We start copying others, hiding our differences, trying to blend in. The next time Indra prepared for an interview, she did something bold. Instead of wearing Western business clothing, she wore a traditional Indian sari. Imagine walking into a professional American office in the late 1970s, wearing a bright, elegant sari. It was unusual. It immediately showed that she came from a different culture. But it also showed confidence. And that small decision changed something important. Instead of trying to hide her identity, she allowed it to become part of her strength. This is a powerful lesson. Many people believe success requires becoming like everyone else, but often the opposite is true. The qualities that make you different, your background, your experiences, your perspective, can become your greatest advantage. At Yale, Indra continued pushing herself academically. The program was intense. Students debated real business problems, analyzed complex strategies, and learned how companies grow, compete, and survive in difficult markets. Some nights she studied until very late. Other days she worked part-time jobs just to cover her basic expenses. Life was not glamorous at all. In fact, there were moments when money was so tight that she carefully planned every small purchase. Every dollar mattered. But these struggles were shaping her resilience. Think about this for a moment. Hard situations often teach lessons that comfortable situations never can. When you must solve problems with limited resources, you develop creativity, discipline, and patience. Those qualities would later become extremely valuable in the business world. Slowly, step by step, Indra was adapting to her new environment. Her confidence grew. Her understanding of global business expanded. She was no longer just a student from India trying to adjust to American culture. She was becoming someone who could move between different worlds, and that ability understanding different perspectives, different cultures, different ways of thinking would soon open doors she never imagined when she first stepped onto the Yale campus. Life after graduation from Yale School of Management did not suddenly become easy for Indra Nooyi. In fact, the real test was only beginning. Many students imagine that once they finish a prestigious program, success will arrive quickly. But the business world can be demanding, competitive, and sometimes unforgiving. Indra soon stepped into the fast-moving environment of corporate America. She began working in consulting, eventually joining the well-known firm Boston Consulting Group. Consulting work is intense. Clients expect answers to difficult problems, often under tight deadlines. Teams spend long hours analyzing numbers, studying markets, and developing strategies for companies trying to grow or survive. Imagine a typical day: early morning meetings, long hours reviewing data, discussions with colleagues who challenge every idea you present. Sometimes the team works late into the night, trying to find the best solution for a client. For Indra, this environment was both exciting and exhausting. She had to prove herself again. Being intelligent and hardworking was not enough. She needed to show that her ideas could help businesses make real decisions. And remember, she was still adjusting to a professional culture that was different from the one she grew up with. At times, she felt the pressure deeply. Picture her sitting at a desk late at night in an office building with lights still glowing in the windows, papers spread across the table, coffee getting cold beside her. Outside, the city is quiet, but inside her mind, questions are moving quickly. Is my strategy correct? Did I miss something? How can I present this idea clearly tomorrow? Many professionals know this feeling very well. The early years of a career often feel like constant testing. You are learning new skills, facing criticism, and sometimes wondering if you truly belong in that environment. But here is something important about Indra's mindset. Instead of seeing challenges as proof that she wasn't ready, she saw them as training. Every difficult project was an opportunity to learn something new. Every demanding client forced her to sharpen her thinking. Slowly, her confidence as a strategist grew stronger. After some time in consulting, she moved into roles inside major companies. One of them was Motorola, where she worked on corporate strategy. Later, she joined A.C. Brown Boveri, often called ABB, another complex international business. These experiences were incredibly valuable. Think about what she was learning. She was seeing how different industries operate. She was observing how executives make decisions under pressure. She was studying how global companies expand into new markets. Each role added another layer of understanding. And something else was happening at the same time. Indra's reputation was growing. Colleagues noticed her ability to see the bigger picture. She wasn't only focused on small details. She could step back and ask deeper questions. Where is this company going in the future? Which markets will matter 10 years from now? What risks are hiding behind today's success? Those kinds of questions are what great strategists ask. Have you ever noticed how some people naturally look further ahead than others? While many focus only on the present problem, a few individuals constantly think about what might happen next. Indra was becoming one of those people. But even as her career advanced, she never forgot the values she learned at home in India. Family remained extremely important to her. She stayed connected to her roots, her culture, and the lessons her mother taught around the dinner table. Those early conversations about responsibility and leadership were still guiding her thinking. Sometimes success can slowly change a person's identity. New environments, new expectations, new pressures. But Indra made a conscious effort to stay grounded. And that balanced global thinking, combined with strong personal values, would soon lead her toward one of the most important opportunities of her life. In the early 1990s, A major American company was searching for leaders who could help shape its future strategy. The company was already famous around the world, but it faced important questions about growth, competition, and long-term direction. That company was PepsiCo, and very soon, Indra Nooyi would walk into its headquarters for a conversation that would quietly change the course of her entire career. When Indra Nooyi first walked into the offices of PepsiCo in the early 1990s, she was not yet the famous executive the world would later recognize. She was a talented strategist with experience from consulting and global companies, but this new environment would challenge her in ways she had never experienced before. PepsiCo was already a giant. Its products were everywhere: supermarkets, restaurants, vending machines, stadiums. The company owned powerful brands and had a global presence. But even successful companies face difficult questions. Markets change, consumer habits change, competitors become stronger. Leaders must constantly decide where the company should go next. Indra joined PepsiCo in 1994 as a senior strategist. Her role was to help the company think about its long-term direction. That might sound simple, but it's actually one of the hardest tasks in business. Imagine being responsible for decisions that could affect tens of thousands of employees and billions of dollars in revenue. Should the company invest in new products? Should it expand into different markets? Should it sell parts of the business that no longer fit the future strategy? These are not easy questions. One of the first things people noticed about Indra was how she approached problems. Instead of jumping quickly to conclusions, she spent time understanding the deeper structure of the business. She studied data carefully. She listened to different perspectives, and when she finally presented an idea, it was usually supported by very clear reasoning. Picture a meeting room filled with senior executives, charts on the wall, financial reports spread across the table. The conversation is serious, and everyone knows the decisions being discussed could shape the company for years. Indra begins explaining her analysis. She speaks calmly but confidently, guiding the group through complex information step by step. Some executives ask tough questions, others challenge her assumptions, but she remains focused, explaining her thinking clearly. Moments like these slowly build trust, and trust is one of the most valuable currencies in leadership. Have you ever worked with someone whose ideas are always thoughtful and well prepared? Over time, people begin to listen more carefully when that person speaks. Their credibility grows. That's exactly what was happening with Indra. One of her most important contributions came when PepsiCo began reconsidering its relationship with the fast food restaurant business. At the time, the company owned major restaurant chains. But the question was whether those businesses truly fit PepsiCo's long-term future. This was not a small decision. Selling such large businesses would be risky. It could change how investors viewed the company. It could affect thousands of employees. Indra studied the situation deeply. She believed PepsiCo should focus more strongly on beverages and snack foods, areas where the company had unique strength. Eventually, her strategic thinking helped guide a major restructuring. The restaurant division was separated into a new company, which later became Yum! Brands. Think about the courage required to support a decision like that. Sometimes leadership means letting go of something that has been part of the company for many years. It's similar to decisions we sometimes face in our own lives. There are moments when holding on to the familiar feels safe, even if it limits future growth. Moving forward often requires releasing something comfortable. Indra's ability to see these long-term patterns made her increasingly valuable to PepsiCo's leadership team. But strategy was only one part of her impact. Colleagues also noticed her work ethic. She prepared intensely for meetings. She asked thoughtful questions. She paid attention to details while still thinking about the big picture. And there was something else that made her stand out. Despite the pressure of corporate leadership, she remained deeply human in her approach to people. She believed that companies were not just systems of profit and numbers. They were communities of individuals with families, dreams, and responsibilities. That perspective would later shape some of the most important decisions of her career. Slowly, year by year, her influence inside PepsiCo grew stronger. Senior leaders trusted her judgment. Her voice carried more weight in strategic discussions. And before long, the company would ask her to take on an even bigger role, one that would place her among the most powerful leaders in global business. By the late 1990s, Indra Nooyi had become one of the most respected voices inside PepsiCo. Her strategic ideas were shaping important decisions, and her reputation for careful thinking had spread across the company's leadership team. But leadership at that level is never comfortable. The higher you climb, the more complicated the problems become. PepsiCo was facing a changing world. Consumer habits were evolving. People were starting to think more about health, nutrition, and the impact of food choices on their lives. At the same time, global competition was becoming stronger. Large companies in the beverage and snack industry were fighting intensely for market share. Inside boardrooms, executives were asking difficult questions. How should the company grow in the next decade? Which products would remain strong? Which ones might lose popularity? How could PepsiCo stay successful in a world that was changing so quickly? Indra became deeply involved in these conversations. One of the moments that truly showed her influence came when PepsiCo began considering major acquisitions, buying other companies that could strengthen its future. These decisions were huge. Acquisitions often cost billions of dollars, and if the strategy is wrong, the consequences can last for years. Imagine sitting at a large conference table with financial experts, lawyers, and executives discussing whether to invest massive resources into a new direction. Everyone brings reports, projections, and risk analyses. The conversation moves slowly because the stakes are so high. During one of these periods of intense decision-making, PepsiCo made a major move by acquiring Tropicana. This decision expanded the company's presence beyond traditional sodas. It pushed PepsiCo further into beverages that consumers often saw as healthier choices. Later, the company also acquired Quaker Oats Company, which brought with it a powerful sports drink brand, Gatorade. Think about how significant those moves were. Instead of relying only on traditional soft drinks, PepsiCo was building a much broader portfolio: juice, sports drinks, snacks, cereals. These additions made the company more flexible and more prepared for future changes in consumer preferences. Indra played an important role in shaping the thinking behind these decisions. She understood something that many leaders sometimes forget: the future rarely looks exactly like the present. Have you ever noticed how quickly trends can change? 10 years ago, certain technologies, foods, or habits seemed normal. Today, many of them have completely evolved. Businesses must think ahead in the same way. Indra's colleagues admired her ability to imagine where markets might move next. She often asked questions like, what will people want in 5 years? What kind of products will families trust? What values will matter more to consumers in the future? These questions helped PepsiCo start preparing earlier than many competitors. But while her professional responsibilities were growing, her personal life was also demanding. She was balancing the intense schedule of a global executive with family responsibilities at home. Long flights, long meetings, late-night strategy sessions. All of this became part of her routine. At times, the pressure was enormous. Imagine trying to lead complex global decisions while also thinking about your family, your children, and your responsibilities outside work. Many leaders struggle with this balance. Indra often spoke openly about this challenge. She believed success should not require losing connection with the people who matter most in your life. One evening after a long day at work, she returned home feeling proud because she had just been promoted to a major leadership role inside PepsiCo. Excited, she walked through the door, expecting to share the news with her family. Her mother, however, greeted her with a completely different request. "Before you celebrate," her mother said calmly, "go buy some milk." At first, Indra felt frustrated. After such a big professional achievement, she expected recognition. But later she understood the deeper lesson. No matter how important your job becomes, you are still a daughter, a parent, a friend. Life outside work keeps you grounded. That small moment stayed with her for many years. And as her responsibilities continued to grow inside PepsiCo, those personal values would guide the kind of leader she was becoming, someone thinking not only about profits, but about the broader role companies play in people's lives. As the years passed, the influence of Indra Nooyi inside PepsiCo continued to grow. Her strategic thinking had already helped guide major decisions, and colleagues increasingly saw her as someone who could navigate both complex numbers of business and the human side of leadership. Then came a moment that marked a major turning point in her career. In 2006, Indra Nooyi was appointed Chief Executive Officer of PepsiCo. This meant she would now lead one of the largest food and beverage companies in the world. Millions of people drank PepsiCo products every day. The company operated in more than 200 countries. The responsibility placed on her shoulders was enormous. Imagine the feeling of walking into the CEO's office for the first time. The desk is larger, the decisions are heavier. Every choice now carries consequences not only for the company, but also for employees, investors, and customers around the world. For many people, such pressure could feel overwhelming. But Indra approached the role with a clear vision. She believed the future of the company depended on more than simply selling popular products. She believed businesses had a responsibility to think about health, sustainability, and long-term impact on society. This idea became known as performance with purpose. The concept was simple but powerful. PepsiCo would continue aiming for strong financial results, good performance, but it would also focus on creating positive impact for people and the planet. Think about how unusual this idea was at the time. For decades, many large corporations focused almost entirely on profits. Social responsibility was often treated as a secondary concern. Indra wanted to change that mindset. She encouraged PepsiCo to invest more in products with lower sugar, less salt, and healthier ingredients. She pushed the company to reduce environmental impact by improving water usage, packaging, and energy efficiency. These changes were not always easy. Some investors worried that focusing on health and sustainability might reduce short-term profits. Some executives wondered if consumers were truly ready for these changes. But Indra believed strongly in the long-term vision. Imagine standing in front of a room full of executives and explaining why the company should invest heavily in a future that might take years to fully develop. It requires courage to defend an idea when not everyone agrees. Have you ever believed strongly in a direction even when others were uncertain? Leadership often means holding on to a long-term vision while others are focused only on immediate results. One of Indra's habits as CEO also revealed something special about her leadership style. She made a point of writing letters to the parents of her senior executives. In those letters, she thanked them for raising such talented individuals who contributed to the company's success. Think about that gesture for a moment. In a world where corporate communication is often formal and distant, she chose to recognize the families behind her employees. It was a reminder that every professional achievement is connected to many people who helped along the way. Small actions like this created loyalty and respect within the organization, and that respect extended far beyond the walls of PepsiCo. Under Indra's leadership, the company continued growing globally, while also adapting to new consumer expectations. Her journey from a curious girl in Chennai to the CEO of a global corporation had already inspired millions. But the deeper impact of her leadership was not only in financial results. It was in the idea that businesses could succeed while also thinking about the well-being of society. And as her years leading PepsiCo continued, the challenges of balancing profit, responsibility, innovation, and global competition would only become more complex. Leading a global company like PepsiCo was never a simple task for Indra Nooyi. Each day brought new decisions, new risks, and new expectations. The company operated across hundreds of markets, each with different cultures, laws, and consumer habits. What worked in one country might not work in another. Imagine starting your day before sunrise because the first meeting involves colleagues in Europe. Then later you speak with teams in Asia. By the time evening arrives, you are still discussing strategies with leaders in North and South America. This was often the rhythm of Indra's schedule. The responsibility could feel enormous. But something interesting about her leadership style stood out. She tried to remain approachable. Even though she was the CEO, she believed leadership should not create distance between people. She often walked through company offices talking directly with employees, asking questions about their work and listening to their ideas. Picture a moment like this. An employee working on a product design suddenly sees the CEO standing beside their desk. Instead of giving orders, she begins asking curious questions. What problem are you trying to solve? What do customers say about this product? What would you change if you could? Those conversations helped her understand the company from many different angles. Think about this idea for a moment. Sometimes the best leaders are not the ones who speak the most. They are the ones who listen carefully, Listening reveals problems that reports and spreadsheets cannot always show. Another important part of Indra's leadership involved guiding PepsiCo through changing consumer expectations. Around the world, more people were thinking carefully about what they ate and drank. Health, nutrition, and sustainability were becoming important topics. Instead of ignoring these changes, she encouraged the company to adapt. PepsiCo began expanding its portfolio of products that people considered healthier options. The company invested more in research to improve ingredients and develop new foods and drinks that matched evolving lifestyles. Change like this rarely happens quickly. Large companies move slowly because they must coordinate many departments, suppliers, and markets. But Indra continued pushing the organization to think long-term. Sometimes this required difficult conversations with investors who expected quick profits. It required convincing teams to rethink traditional products and explore new ideas. Have you ever tried to change a habit that many people around you were comfortable with? Maybe at work, in school, or even in your personal life. Change often meets resistance at first because people prefer the familiar. But progress usually begins when someone is willing to question old patterns. During her time as CEO, PepsiCo's revenues continued to grow, and the company strengthened its position as one of the world's leading food and beverage businesses. Yet Indra often reminded people that leadership was not only about financial numbers. She spoke frequently about values, integrity, responsibility, and empathy. She believed companies should consider the communities where they operate, the environmental impact of their operations, and the well-being of employees. These ideas helped shape how many people viewed modern corporate leadership. But even while leading a company with hundreds of thousands of employees, Indra never forgot the lessons from her childhood. The conversations at the dinner table in Chennai, where she once pretended to be a national leader, had quietly prepared her for these real-world responsibilities. Isn't it interesting how small moments in childhood can echo through an entire lifetime? A simple question from a parent, a challenge from a teacher, a small opportunity that pushes us to think bigger. Those moments often plant seeds that grow slowly over many years. And as Indra continued guiding PepsiCo through an evolving world, she also began reflecting more deeply on the experiences that shaped her own path, the challenges, the risks, and the choices that carried her from a young student in India to one of the most influential leaders in global business. As the years passed, Indra Nooyi began reflecting more often on the long journey that had brought her from the streets of Chennai to the leadership of PepsiCo. When people looked at her success from the outside, they often saw only the title, CEO of a global company. But behind that title was a long story filled with effort, uncertainty, and many moments of learning. One of the lessons she often shared involved resilience, the ability to continue moving forward, even when things feel difficult. Throughout her career, Indra had experienced moments when she felt like an outsider. As a young woman from India working in corporate America during the 1980s and 1990s, she sometimes walked into meeting rooms where very few people looked like her or shared her background. Imagine entering a room full of executives and realizing you are different in several ways: your accent, your culture, your experiences. For some people, that situation might create fear or silence. But Indra chose a different response. Instead of trying to hide those differences, she leaned into them. Her international perspective allowed her to understand global markets more deeply. Her experiences growing up in India helped her see opportunities in emerging economies that others might overlook. Think about this idea for a moment. Sometimes the qualities that make us feel different can actually become our strongest advantages. The key is learning to use them with confidence. Another important lesson from her journey involved preparation. Colleagues often described Indra as someone who came to every meeting extremely well prepared. She studied reports carefully. She asked thoughtful questions. She tried to understand problems from many angles before offering solutions. This habit might sound simple, but it made a powerful difference. Have you ever noticed how preparation changes the way you feel in a difficult situation? When you walk into a meeting, an exam, or an important conversation, knowing that you have done the work, your confidence grows naturally. Preparation cannot remove every challenge, but it can give you the strength to face them. Indra also spoke honestly about the complexity of balancing career and family. Being a global CEO meant constant travel, long hours, and enormous responsibility. At the same time, she was a mother and a daughter who cared deeply about her family. She sometimes described the feeling of living two lives at once, one in the corporate boardroom, making billion-dollar decisions, and another at home helping her children with everyday concerns. Many people listening to her story recognize this challenge. Modern life often pulls us in many directions: work, family, personal goals, responsibilities. Finding balance is not always easy. Indra never claimed she had perfect answers. Instead, she emphasized the importance of support systems. Family, friends, mentors, and colleagues all play roles in helping individuals succeed. Think about the people in your own life who support you. Perhaps someone encouraged you during a difficult moment or believed in your abilities when you doubted yourself. Success rarely happens alone. During her years leading PepsiCo, Indra also continued speaking publicly about responsible business practices. She encouraged other leaders to think about the long-term impact of their decisions on employees, communities, and the environment. Her message was simple. Companies are powerful forces in society, and with that power comes responsibility. Over time, her leadership style influenced conversations far beyond PepsiCo. Business schools studied her strategies. Young professionals around the world looked at her career as proof that leadership could come from many different backgrounds. Yet when people asked her about the secret to her success, her answer often returned to the same humble idea. It began with curiosity, the curiosity of a young girl asking questions at the dinner table, the curiosity of a student exploring new ideas, the curiosity of a strategist trying to understand how companies could adapt to a changing world. And that curiosity would continue shaping the way she thought about leadership, opportunity, and the meaning of success itself. When Indra Nooyi eventually stepped down from her role leading PepsiCo in 2018, many people around the world looked back at her journey with admiration. During her time as CEO, the company had grown significantly, expanded its global reach, and begun adapting to new expectations around health, sustainability, and responsible business. But when Indra spoke about her career, she rarely focused only on financial results or corporate milestones. Instead, she often returned to the human side of the story, the lessons learned, the people who supported her, and the values that guided her decisions. Imagine looking back at decades of work that influenced millions of people, products and stores around the world, employees building their careers inside the company, strategic decisions shaping entire industries. It would be easy to feel proud of such achievements. Yet Indra's reflections often sounded more thoughtful than celebratory. She spoke about the importance of staying curious throughout life. Even after reaching the highest level of leadership, she believed there was always more to learn. New technologies appear, markets evolve, societies change their expectations. A good leader must remain a student of the world. Think about that idea for a moment. Many people believe learning is something we finish after school or university. But the truth is, the most successful individuals often continue learning long after formal education ends. They ask questions. They listen carefully. They stay open to new ideas. Indra also emphasized the importance of courage. Her journey required many bold decisions, leaving India to study abroad, entering industries where she had to prove herself again and again, supporting strategic changes that carried enormous risk. Each step required a willingness to face uncertainty. Have you ever stood at a crossroads in your own life? A moment where one path felt safe and familiar, while another path offered growth but also risk? Those moments define many of our life stories. Courage does not mean feeling no fear. It means moving forward even when fear is present. Another lesson from her story involves identity. Early in her career, she realized that trying to hide her cultural background would never bring real confidence. The moment she embraced who she truly was, her accent, her traditions, her experiences, she discovered a new strength. This lesson reaches far beyond business. Every person carries a unique story shaped by family, culture, and personal experiences. Instead of seeing those differences as limitations, they can become sources of creativity and perspective. In today's global world, diverse perspectives often lead to better solutions. Indra also spoke about gratitude. She remembered the teachers who challenged her thinking, the mentors who guided her career, and especially the family members who supported her from the beginning. It is easy to focus only on individual achievement, but when we look closely at any success story, we usually find many invisible contributors, people who offered advice, encouragement, or simply belief. Perhaps the most powerful image from her story still returns to that dinner table in Chennai many years ago. A mother asking her daughters to imagine themselves as leaders. At the time, it might have seemed like a simple family activity, but those small exercises planted the idea that leadership was possible, that their voices mattered, that their ideas could shape the future. Think about the power of small moments like that. A conversation, a question, a challenge that pushes someone to think bigger. Sometimes the seeds of extraordinary journeys are planted in very ordinary places. And if there is one gentle reminder we can take from Indra Nooyi's story, it might be this: stay curious, stay courageous, and never underestimate the quiet power of believing that your voice can make a difference.